Who is the true monster in history? Dictators who killed millions without ever raising a sword. Conquerors who turned cities to ash and lives into mere numbers. Ideologues who made their own people their easiest victims. Get ready to dive deep into a dark and disturbing journey through the names history wishes it could forget, from Idi Amin to Mao Zedong. Meet the leaders who didn't just rule, they exterminated. But before we begin this journey into the darkest corners of humanity, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and tell us in the comments which of these tyrants you think was the most ruthless. Your support is what allows us to bring the stories no one else dares to tell. Now, take a deep breath, because what's coming next isn't for the faint of heart. Idi Amin, the butcher of Uganda, 500,000 dead. How does a man become a monster? That's the question that looms over the figure of Idi Amin, an imposing giant with an easy smile and blood-stained hands. Behind the charismatic face and almost childlike humor hid a voracious predator, a man who didn't need a world war to leave his indelible mark on African history. He only needed one thing: absolute power. Idi Amin learned about weapons, tactics, and psychological control while serving in the British colonial army. There, amid orders and spilled blood, he grasped a brutal truth. Strength doesn't need justification. It only needs to be feared. After Uganda gained independence and political instability spread, Amin saw his chance. In 1971, backed by the military and armed with the cold resolve of a strategist, he staged a coup. President Milton Obote was overthrown. Idi Amin declared himself Uganda's supreme leader. In the early days, the people celebrated. He promised fair rule, rooted in tradition and free from the corruption of the past regime. But the mask fell quickly, and hell took over. Repression became the new law. Amin expelled over 80,000 Asians, crippling the economy and plunging Uganda into chaos. Critical voices silenced forever. Opponents vanished into the shadows. Families found mutilated bodies floating in the silent waters of the Nile. With Soviet backing and growing confidence in his untouchable status, Amin turned Uganda into a kingdom of terror. Doctors, teachers, journalists, no one was safe. His armed forces became ruthless hunters of anyone suspected of disloyalty, and the darkest rumor, that at private banquets the dictator didn't settle for ordinary meat. Whispers of cannibalism spread, in a land where even silence could be deadly. Though never confirmed, the rumors only reinforced one terrifying truth. In Amin's Uganda, everything was possible, and nothing was forbidden. By 1979, the tide finally turned. Neighboring Tanzanian forces invaded Uganda, forcing Idi Amin to flee. The Lion of Uganda became an exile, living peacefully in Saudi Arabia until his death decades later, never facing justice. But his legacy couldn't be buried. Over 500,000 dead, a nation torn apart. A wound that even generations later still bleeds. Yet while Idi Amin ruled through brutal physical force, other dictators would soon learn how to dominate not only bodies, but minds. In the next chapter, we'll meet a man who turned ideology into a killing machine. Vladimir Lenin, the architect of the Red Terror, 1 million dead. When we think of revolution, we imagine justice, freedom, and hope. But what if revolution doesn't liberate us? It chains. For many, Vladimir Lenin is a symbol of change, an intellectual who stood against Tsarism and promised to build a new world. But behind the black and white portraits, beneath the glow of red banners, hid something rarely taught in schools, an architect of fear, repression, and death. In 1917, the world shifted. Lenin led the October Revolution, toppling Russia's old regime and vowing peace, land, and bread. But once in power, he quickly realized that to destroy the old world, words weren't enough. Resistance had to be annihilated. Lenin established the Soviet Union's first concentration camps, the infamous gulags. There, political opponents, religious figures, intellectuals, and even peasants were sent to die slowly in brutal, cold, forced labor and relentless starvation. But the horror didn't end there. In the Don region, a chilling order echoed. The Cossacks must disappear. Over 700,000 men, women, and children were slaughtered. This wasn't war, it was ethnic cleansing. Lenin's brutality peaked in Tambov. Peasants, sick of forced grain confiscations, rebelled. His answer? Cannons, fire, summary executions, 15,000 peasants killed, entire villages burned to the ground. Not even former allies were spared. In Kronstadt, sailors, once loyal to the Bolsheviks, rose up, demanding democracy. They were silenced in blood. 3,000 dead in just days. Across cities and farmlands, millions perished, not only by the gun, but also by starvation carefully orchestrated by the state. Lenin knew a starving population is an obedient one. In 1924, Lenin died, ravaged by disease and the weight of his own legacy. But the terror he unleashed didn't die with him. His successors, especially Joseph Stalin, would use the very tools Lenin created to turn the Soviet Union into a living hell. To this day, many hail Lenin as a visionary. But for the millions erased from existence under his rule, he will never be remembered as a hero. He was the teacher of fear, the man who showed the 20th century that ideology could be just as lethal as the sword. But while Lenin exterminated his own people in the name of revolution, across the world, a young African leader was about to turn hunger into his deadliest weapon. Yakubu Gowon, the general who turned blockade into genocide. 1. 1 million dead. Is it possible to kill without ever raising a weapon? For Yakubu Gowon, the answer was simple and terrifying. Amid promises of a new dawn for Africa, young Nigeria, rich in oil and hope, fell into the hands of a man who would turn politics into war and food into a death sentence. In 1966, amid coups and ethnic unrest, Yakubu Gowon emerged, a young and ambitious military man. At just 32, he became Nigeria's head of state. In his mind, keeping the nation united was the supreme mission, no matter the cost. But the southeast of Nigeria disagreed. The Igbo people, marginalized and persecuted, declared independence, forming the Republic of Biafra. To Gowon, this wasn't a political movement. It was treason. And like every tyrant on this list, he reacted with an iron fist. The civil war began, but it quickly became more than just a military conflict. Gowon imposed a complete blockade on Biafra. No food, no medicine, no hope in or out. Victory wouldn't come through bombs, but through the deadly silence of starvation. In the villages, the scenes were apocalyptic. Children with swollen, malnourished bodies wandered the roads like ghosts. Mothers, unable to nurse, buried their babies beneath an indifferent sky. Men collapsed beside fertile fields, where confiscated or destroyed crops would never be harvested. Hunger was deliberately turned into a weapon. Every empty stomach was a strike against the enemy. Every death by starvation was celebrated as a strategic victory. While the world watched in horror as images of Biafra's famine leaked out, Gowon remained unmoved. For him, surrender was the only acceptable outcome. And in 1970, it came. Biafra fell, but not before over 1 million civilians, mostly women and children, were reduced to cold statistics. Shockingly, Gowon wasn't overthrown for his atrocities. Instead, another military coup removed him from power in 1975. He never faced trial, never answered for his decisions. He died peacefully, carrying the weight of one of the most silent and brutal tragedies of the 20th century. Meanwhile, the scars of the Biafran War still linger in Nigeria, a cruel reminder that sometimes the deadliest weapons don't fire bullets. They kill slowly, through hunger, despair, and oblivion. But hunger was only one of many faces of genocide in the 20th century. Soon, the world would witness an even more direct terror when ideology and public executions became routine in the streets of Ethiopia. Mengistu Haile Mariam, the revolution that devoured Ethiopia, 1.5 million dead. When the promise of freedom knocks at your door and death answers, Mengistu Haile Mariam wasn't just another dictator. He was the architect of one of the most brutal and blood-soaked periods Africa has ever witnessed. In the name of justice, he turned Ethiopia into a macabre stage where bullets, starvation and fear were handed out as state policy. The year was 1974. Ethiopia's monarchy, led by Emperor Haile Selassie, was on the verge of collapse. Famine gripped the nation, protests erupted in the streets, and the people demanded change. That's when the Derg, a communist military council, seized power. And at its forefront stood Mengistu. At first, he promised equality, land reform, and an end to injustice. But it quickly became clear that his true agenda was far darker. The Red Revolution was only just beginning. Mengistu wasted no time. As soon as he solidified control, he launched the infamous campaign known as the Red Terror. The strategy was simple and deadly. Eliminate every dissenting voice. Students, teachers, community leaders, intellectuals. No one was safe. Executions became routine. Night after night, security forces stormed homes, dragged young people into the streets, and executed them in front of terrified neighbors. Their bodies were left as grotesque warnings, pinned with signs that read, "Enemy of the people." But the horror didn't stop there. The families of the victims were forced to pay for the very bullets used to kill their loved ones. The price of silence and submission was literally paid in blood and money. As if mass executions weren't enough, Mengistu plunged Ethiopia into economic ruin. Forced collectivization and the relocation of entire communities destroyed what little agricultural production remained. Famine spread like wildfire. To the outside world, Ethiopia became synonymous with misery, but to Mengistu, hunger was just another weapon of control. Letting millions starve slowly, silenced entire regions, and crushed any hope of rebellion. As ruthless as he was, Mengistu's reign of terror wouldn't last forever. In 1991, after years of civil war and international pressure, he was finally overthrown. But instead of prison, Mengistu fled to Zimbabwe, where he lived under protection until the end of his days. He was never tried, never apologized, never showed remorse. History remembers him as the man who turned a revolution into a slaughterhouse. But Mengistu's terror, though merciless, still felt regional. In the next chapter, we'll travel to the Far East, where one leader shaped an entire country in his cruel image, creating a state of paranoia, torture chambers, and prison camps that exist to this day. Kim Il-sung, the eternal father of North Korea, 1.6 million dead. Every decision went through him. Every idea needed his approval, and every doubt about his power was punished with death. The economy was fully nationalized, freedoms abolished, personality cult, not optional, mandatory. Ordinary citizens were forced to take part in marches and ceremonies where they were expected to worship Kim Il-sung as a god. Posters, songs, statues. The leader was everywhere, but most importantly, in their minds. But repression wasn't only about propaganda. During the Korean War, 1950-1953, Kim Il-sung revealed his true face. Accusations of sympathy for the South became death sentences. Entire villages were wiped out. Suspected individuals were executed. And survivors, they were thrown into the infamous political prison camps, the Kwanliso. In these hellish places, generations paid for the supposed crimes of their ancestors. Parents, children, grandchildren, all condemned to starvation, forced labor, and daily torture. No one came out, They were buried in absolute silence, forgotten by the outside world. Fear became the lifeblood of the nation. Even after the ceasefire that split the peninsula, the nightmare continued. Surveillance was total, indoctrination was relentless, escape, impossible fantasy, criticism, an instant death sentence. To keep the population united through terror, Kim Il-sung needed an eternal enemy, the United States and Western imperialism. This narrative justified everything, from mass executions to endless internal purges. Kim Il-sung died in 1994, but his ideology did not. He was succeeded by his son, Kim Jong-il, and later by his grandson, Kim Jong-un. 3 generations of tyranny. 3 generations that inherited not only power, but institutionalized fear. Prison camps still exist, public executions still happen, and the people still live under the watchful eye of the Eternal Father. The estimated death toll under his rule stands at over 1.6 million through executions, famine, forced labor, and disappearances. But Kim Il-sung's true legacy isn't just in the numbers. It's in a nation where thinking differently remains a deadly crime. Yet while Kim Il-sung built his reign on fear and absolute control, the next dictator would take ideology to an even more devastating level, destroying his own people in the name of a rural utopia. Pol Pot, the man who tried to erase his own country, 2.5 million dead. Imagine waking up one day to find out that your profession, your intelligence, even your glasses, were now death sentences. That's exactly what happened under Pol Pot's regime. The leader of the Khmer Rouge and the architect of a genocide that didn't target foreign enemies or minorities, but his own people. In his insane quest for an equal utopia, Pol Pot turned Cambodia into a slaughterhouse where every citizen became both a survivor and a prisoner. In 1975, after years of civil war, the Khmer Rouge finally seized Phnom Penh, Cambodia's capital. The people, exhausted from conflict, hoped for peace and stability. Instead, they were met with brutal orders. Within hours, entire cities were emptied. Doctors, engineers, teachers, merchants, all were forced to abandon everything and march into the unknown. Where were they going? To labor camps. Why? Because in Pol Pot's twisted vision, cities represented corruption and decadence. His new plan was simple and monstrous: destroy modern society and replace it with a nation of obedient rural workers. In the fields, hell was revealed. Working from sunrise to sunset with no rest, under extreme hunger and rampant disease, became the new normal. Deaths weren't just tolerated, they were desired, seen as a way to purify the population. But forced labor wasn't the only engine of terror. Paranoia ruled the regime. Anyone who showed signs of knowledge, wearing glasses, speaking a foreign language, or even reading, was branded an enemy of the revolution. Executions were swift and merciless. Mass shootings, unspeakable tortures, and mass graves became part of daily life. The most infamous symbol of this genocide became known as the killing fields. There, silence was shattered by the sound of skulls being crushed, bullets fired, and children ripped from their parents, never to be seen again. Between 1975 and 1979, around 2.5 million Cambodians, nearly a quarter of the population, perished. Many died from starvation and exhaustion. Others were brutally executed. And many more simply for daring to be different. Pol Pot wanted to erase history and start from zero, but his regime collapsed under the weight of its own sins. In 1979, Vietnamese forces invaded and overthrew the Khmer Rouge. Pol Pot fled into the jungle and, despite being responsible for one of the worst genocides of the 20th century, was never brought to trial. He died in 1998 without showing a shred of remorse. While Pol Pot destroyed his nation under the guise of creating a perfect society, The next tyrant we'll face chose a specific enemy for his fury, turning prejudice into an industrial machine of death. Prepare to cross the darkest line in modern history. Ismail Enver, the architect of the Armenian Holocaust, 2.5 million dead. Not every genocide happens behind fences or in gas chambers. Some unfold under the scorching sun through endless marches and complicit silence. In the early 20th century, as the world tore itself apart in World War I, a cold and calculated massacre was orchestrated, not on battlefields, but in desolate deserts. At the helm of this tragedy, Ismail Enver, the ambitious leader of the Ottoman Empire, who decided that the very existence of an entire people was intolerable. Enver, one of the leaders of the Young Turk Revolution, rose to power promising modernization and national strength. But when his military campaigns failed, especially against the Russians at the Battle of Sarikamish, he needed a scapegoat, and he found the perfect target: the Armenians. A Christian minority in a predominantly Muslim empire, Armenians were falsely accused of conspiring with the Russians. What followed was one of history's most brutal ethnic cleansing campaigns. In 1915, Enver ordered what he called a resettlement, but the world would soon realize it was merely a euphemism for mass extermination. Men were the first targets. Thousands were lined up, shot or beheaded. Women, children, and the elderly were forced into death marches that stretched for weeks across the deserts of Syria and Mesopotamia. No food, no water, exposed to relentless heat and constant attacks from soldiers and bandits. Many died from exhaustion and starvation. Others were raped and murdered along the way. Those who survived the marches found death waiting for them in makeshift concentration camps and forgotten slums. But Armenians weren't the only victims. Enver also targeted and exterminated Pontic Greeks and Assyrians in a genocidal campaign aimed at erasing any trace of diversity within the empire. The numbers speak for themselves. 1.2 million Armenians killed, 830,000 Greeks wiped out, 500,000 Assyrians exterminated. Nearly 3 million lives erased in the name of ethnic hatred disguised as patriotism. Even more revolting is the fact that Enver never faced justice. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, he fled to Central Asia, where he continued plotting until he was killed in combat in 1922. No trial, no sentence, no apology. The Armenian genocide remains denied by many to this day. But for the descendants of the victims, stories passed down through generations ensure the memory will never fade. Enver may have tried to destroy an entire people, but he failed to silence their voices. And while Enver destroyed through revenge and ideology, the next name on our list destroyed for sheer glory and conquest. Prepare to meet the man who turned the ancient world into a battlefield of death and devastation: Alexander the Great. The conqueror who sowed death in the name of glory, 3.5 million dead. The world calls him great. History books praise his military genius. But for millions of souls, Alexander was anything but heroic. Behind the crowns, statues, and legends lies a hidden and disturbing truth. That of a ruthless conqueror who turned resistance into annihilation and built his empire atop piles of corpses. From a young age, Alexander was groomed to rule. Son of King Philip II of Macedon and student of the philosopher Aristotle, the young prince had a destiny carved out for him. But kingdoms weren't enough. He wanted the world. When his father was assassinated, Alexander took the throne and embarked on a journey that would reshape history and destroy countless lives. His ambition was crystal clear: create the largest empire the world had ever seen and immortalize his name. To achieve this, he spoke the language of war and used death as his most powerful tool. Alexander's march was relentless. City after city, kingdom after kingdom, they all faced two choices: submission, or destruction. Thebes, a symbol of Greek resistance, was obliterated. Its walls crumbled and its people were massacred or sold into slavery. Tyre, in present-day Lebanon, dared to defy him. After a brutal 7-month siege, Alexander ordered a massacre. Survivors were publicly crucified. In Egypt, though welcomed as a liberator, he swiftly imposed absolute rule, enforcing his culture and crushing dissent. But it was during his Eastern campaign, especially in India, that the horror reached its peak. Tribes who had never even heard his name were slaughtered. Entire populations were wiped out simply for standing in the path of his glory. Some communities, upon hearing of his advancing armies, chose mass suicide over facing certain violence. Women were raped, children enslaved, sacred temples looted, all to feed the emperor's insatiable thirst for conquest. It's estimated that his campaigns resulted in the deaths of 3.5 million people. These were not wartime casualties. They were not collateral damage. They were the direct victims of his ruthless policy of domination. For Alexander, destruction wasn't a byproduct. It was the method. His death at the age of 32 didn't end the suffering. His empire collapsed into bloody conflicts that perpetuated even more death and instability. Yet history transformed him into an icon, the great, the eternal. But for those who lived under the shadow of his legions, he was never a hero. He was the reaper of civilizations. And while Alexander used war to conquer, the next tyrant on our list turned honor and blind loyalty into instruments of mass murder. Prepare to meet the general who pushed Japan to the extreme limits of brutality. Hideki Tojo, the warrior who turned Asia into an extermination ground, 5 million dead. What happens when loyalty becomes blind and duty is mistaken for the right to destroy? In Imperial Japan, where the emperor was seen as divine and obedience mattered more than life itself, one man pushed these ideals to terrifying extremes. Hideki Tojo, the disciplined general, became the symbol of a ruthless war machine. Under his leadership, Asia plunged into a nightmare. Tojo was not a revolutionary or a classic dictator. He was a pure military man, forged by the rigid structure of Japan's army and an unshakable belief in his nation's superiority. In 1941, he became Japan's prime minister, a title that to him meant permission to turn the Asian continent into a massive battlefield. For Tojo, war wasn't just inevitable, it was necessary. Expanding the empire, subjugating neighbors, and eliminating inferior enemies wasn't a choice. It was a sacred mission. Under his command, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, dragging the United States into World War II. But the real horrors unfolded far from Western eyes, in China, Korea, and Southeast Asia. In Nanjing, tens of thousands of women were raped and civilians beheaded for sport. Prisoners of war were treated like disposable objects, used in medical experiments and executed without hesitation. Civilians were systematically exterminated by gunfire, flames, and starvation. For Japanese soldiers, raised under the doctrine of absolute obedience, mercy was weakness. Tojo's word was law, and his orders were merciless. Conquer at any cost. Hatred and brutality became part of the training. Even Japanese schoolchildren were taught to die for the emperor if necessary. As millions perished, Japan began losing the war. By 1945, with Hiroshima and Nagasaki obliterated by atomic bombs and the empire in ruins, Tojo attempted suicide. But the attempt failed, an ironic twist for a man who had glorified death. Captured by the Allies, he stood trial for war crimes and crimes against humanity. His final words before execution carried no remorse, only loyalty to the emperor until his last breath. Hanged in 1948, Tojo took with him the burden of having directly and indirectly ended over 5 million lives. But while Tojo used war to devastate, the next name on our list went even further. He didn't need armies to create hell, just greed and the African jungle to turn ambition into genocide. Leopold II of Belgium, the king who turned the Congo into his personal hell, 15 million dead. When we think of kings, we imagine crowns, palaces, and pomp. But what if a king became the lord of death in a distant land, where the only law was the whip and the currency was human suffering? In the heart of Africa, under the shadow of European civilization, Leopold II of Belgium created his own empire, not for his people, not for Belgium, but for himself. And he turned the Congo into something beyond hell. In the gilded halls of Europe, Leopold II presented himself as a philanthropist. He created the International African Association with promises of bringing civilization and progress to the Congo. Lies. The true objective was simple and perverse: to exploit the region's natural resources and enslave its people. Under the benevolent facade, the king imposed a brutal and private administration in which soldiers and overseers had the freedom to punish and kill. The main wealth? Latex extracted from rubber trees, but to ensure the quotas were met, barbaric methods were adopted. Those who did not meet the required production were severely punished. Amputations, especially of hands, became a common and systematic practice. Public executions were a daily occurrence. Entire villages were burned as an example for others that dared to resist. Families were taken hostage and killed to force men to work. The force publique, the king's militia, maintained terror with iron fists and barrels of gunpowder. Women and children were constant targets of sexual violence and torture. In the jungle, the sound of screams and gunfire echoed day and night. The Congo became a massive plantation of slaves and corpses. Between 1885 and 1908, the period during which Leopold II controlled the Congo as his personal property, even the most conservative estimates speak of 10 to 15 million dead. Deaths from hunger, exhaustion, executions, diseases, or simply from despair. For every drop of latex exported, liters of blood were spilled. But while millions died in the jungle, Leopold lived in absolute luxury in Brussels, indifferent to the genocide he sponsored. It was only after international denunciations and public scandals that the king was forced to cede control of the Congo to the Belgian government in 1908. Even so, he died unjudged, surrounded by riches and honors. For decades, the genocide in the Congo was forgotten or minimized. History books avoided the narrative, preferring to highlight other facets of European imperialism. But for the descendants of those who perished under Leopold II's rule, the pain and horror were never erased. Leopold was not a king. He was an executioner disguised as a civilizer, and if Leopold's greed destroyed out of avarice, the next name on this list destroyed for pure pleasure in brutality. Prepare to meet the man who elevated war to the level of a bloody spectacle. Tamerlane, the conqueror who turned terror into art. 17 million dead. What if death wasn't just a consequence of war, but the true objective of it? In the 14th century, while empires rose and fell in the heart of Asia, one man emerged not only to conquer, but to teach the world to fear his name forever. He didn't just want to win. He wanted every victory to be etched with blood and bones. His name? Tamerlane, the Prince of Terror. Born as Timur among the tribes of Central Asia, he was not a direct heir of Genghis Khan, but that did not stop him from proclaiming himself his spiritual successor. His dream was to restore the glory of the ancient Mongol Empire. But unlike his master, Tamerlane added an even more brutal ingredient to conquest: the theatricality of terror. Each battle was not just for victory, it was to serve as an example. The message was clear: resist, and your fate will be total annihilation. In Baghdad, after conquering the city in 1401, Tamerlane ordered each soldier to deliver 2 or 3 severed heads to him. The result? Almost 90,000 people dead in a single day. In Delhi, the Indian capital, the slaughter was indiscriminate. Muslims and Hindus, men, women, and children were massacred as the city burned in flames. In Aleppo and Damascus, in Syria, temples were looted, intellectuals were murdered, and the corpses were piled up in the streets like trash. His signature mark, pyramids of human skulls. In every destroyed city, grotesque towers were erected with the remains of the victims, a macabre monument to ensure that no one would ever forget Tamerlane. The numbers are terrifying. During his campaigns, it is estimated that 17 million people died. This doesn't include just those who fell in battles. It includes civilians, innocents, entire cultures wiped off the map in the name of domination. For Tamerlane, war was more than just conquest. It was a cruel performance to instill fear in future generations. Even with all his brutality, his death in 1405 was almost ironic. He succumbed to a fever while planning yet another invasion, this time to China. His empire quickly fragmented after his death, but his legacy, that survived in legends, in ruins, and in the endless echo of fear. But if Tamerlane turned terror into a spectacle, the next name on this list perfected death on an industrial scale. He did not seek just power or glory. He sought to eradicate entire peoples with cold and methodical efficiency. Prepare yourself to enter the era of absolute hatred. Adolf Hitler, the architect of modern hatred, 17 million dead. What happens when hatred stops being just a feeling and becomes a policy of the state? Adolf Hitler was not just a dictator. He was the face of horror incarnated in the 20th century. A man who was not satisfied with conquering territories or overthrowing governments. He wanted to purify the world according to his distorted and sick vision by eliminating all those he deemed undesirable. And to do this, he created the most efficient and cruel death machine humanity has ever seen. After Germany's humiliation in World War I, Hitler emerged as the voice of resentment. He promised to restore pride to the Germans. He promised greatness. He promised revenge. But to fulfill these promises, he needed enemies, and he found them. Jews accused of controlling finances and conspiring against Germany. Gypsies, seen as degenerates, communists, homosexuals, the physically and mentally disabled, all considered impure. His rise to power in 1933 was just the beginning. From that point on, every law, every decree, and every speech paved the way for what would come next, the final solution. In concentration camps spread across occupied Europe, hell took physical form. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, places that now send chills down one's spine, were death factories. Gas chambers disguised as showers. Crematoriums that operated day and night to erase the traces of bodies. Medical experiments so cruel that they defy any human logic. Between 6 and 7 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. But Hitler did not stop there. The war he initiated. By invading Poland, he shattered world peace. Advancing over France, the Soviet Union, and other nations, he spread destruction on a global scale. The result? More than 17 million dead, among Holocaust victims, civilians in combat zones, soldiers, and prisoners. In 1945, with Berlin in ruins and the Third Reich collapsing, Hitler took refuge in his bunker. There, facing imminent defeat, he took his own life alongside Eva Braun. He did not face trial. He did not look into the eyes of the survivors. He did not answer to the world, but his nefarious ideology survived. Even in defeat, Hitler left a deep and permanent scar on humanity. The Holocaust and World War II became eternal symbols of what happens when hatred is institutionalized. But as monstrous as Hitler was, he was not the deadliest dictator in history. While Europe burned in war, on the other side of the globe, a silent and paranoid man was creating his own extermination machine. Not with bombs or gas chambers, but with hunger and fear. Prepare to enter the era of invisible terror. Joseph Stalin, the dictator who turned scarcity into his deadliest weapon. 30 million dead. What if an empty plate was deadlier than a bullet? What if fear was so dense that even the air felt heavy? Under the iron fist of Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Union was not just ruled, it was slowly murdered. He didn't need armies to destroy. His true weapon was hunger, his strategy, fear, and his sentence, silence. In 1924, after Lenin's death, Stalin took control of the Communist Party. But he didn't just want to lead, he wanted to control everything and everyone. Swiftly, he eliminated his political rivals through executions and secret imprisonments. Gradually, the faces that once appeared alongside him in official photos simply vanished, physically and historically. On paper, Stalin promised to modernize the Soviet Union. In practice, he turned the country into a massive concentration camp. Between 1932 and 1933, during the infamous Holodomor, Stalin used famine as punishment. Ukraine, the breadbasket of the Soviet Empire, was marked as an enemy. Grains were confiscated, food supplies were blocked, fleeing in search of food, a crime. The consequences were devastating. Families died inside their homes. Children were found dead next to fertile fields that no one could harvest. Stories of cannibalism emerged in desperate villages. It is estimated that between 4 and 7 million people died in this episode alone. And Stalin, he called it necessary for the revolution. But Stalin did not stop at hunger. Between 1936 and 1938, he launched the Great Purge. Paranoid and ruthless, he ordered thousands of officials, intellectuals, peasants, and even close friends to be arrested and executed. Overcrowded prisons, tortures until false confessions were extracted, mass executions, burials in mass graves. In a scenario where even whispering against the regime meant death, the Soviet Union became a nation of shadows and whispers. In total, it is estimated that Stalin's policies resulted in the deaths of over 30 million people. Many died of hunger, others in forced labor camps, the notorious gulags. Many more were shot and buried in secret. Stalin died in 1953, not as a deposed tyrant, but as a leader venerated by the cult he created himself. Even after his death, the truth about his atrocities took decades to surface. And if you think the death toll ends here, you are mistaken. Even Stalin, with his famine and purges, did not claim the title of the deadliest dictator in history. That sinister title belongs to the next name on our list. A man who killed with hunger, indoctrinated with fear, and erased millions as if they were mere numbers in a political calculation. Prepare to discover the face of the greatest killer of the century, Mao Zedong, the architect of the tragedy that buried 78 million lives. What if an ideology, instead of liberating, served to enslave and kill? Amid revolutionary slogans and smiling portraits, the greatest killer in modern history hid in plain sight. Mao Zedong, the supreme leader of Communist China, promised his people equality, prosperity, and dignity. However, what he delivered was something entirely different: misery, fear, and death on a scale never seen before. In 1949, after years of civil war, Mao proclaimed the founding of the People's Republic of China. The people celebrated. The oppression of the past seemed to have been left behind, but from then on, the nightmare began to take shape. In the following years, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward, his insane plan to transform China into an economic powerhouse. How? By abolishing private property, collectivizing agriculture, and forcing millions to work on steel and infrastructure projects. There was just one problem. Mao's ideas were as detached from reality as they were cruel. The communes did not work. Production plummeted. And when famine began, the party hid the truth. Mao ordered that no one speak of the crisis. Grains continued to be exported to maintain appearances, while in the villages, People died in droves. The images from this period are soul-crushing. Entire families died sitting inside their homes, too weak to even search for food. Cases of cannibalism emerged as the last and grotesque attempt at survival. Children buried parents. Parents buried children, until there was no one left to mourn. The famine caused by the Great Leap Forward killed between 20 and 45 million people, according to historians. But to Mao, everything was justified. For the sake of the revolution, when the chaos of famine passed, something even more perverse followed. In 1966, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution, a brutal attempt to regain political control and eliminate bourgeois enemies. The result? Intellectuals were persecuted, humiliated, and executed. Books, works of art, and ancient temples were destroyed. Young fanatics, the Red Guards, became judges, executioners, and tormentors of their own teachers and families. It is estimated that another 2 to 3 million people died directly in the purges and repressions of this phase. Tens of millions more suffered from torture, imprisonment, and forced labor. Mao Zedong died in 1976 of natural causes, surrounded by luxury and adoration. He was never judged. He never apologized. He never admitted the destruction he caused. His face still graces banknotes. His portrait still watches over Tiananmen Square. But for those who know the true story, Mao is not just a leader. He is the architect of the greatest tragedy caused by a single man. It is estimated that his policies and purges resulted in the deaths of up to 78 million people. No empire, no army, no war has ever surpassed that. These men, from Idi Amin to Mao Zedong, did not govern. They massacred. Their words seduced. Their promises deceived, but their actions turned dreams into nightmares and nations into cemeteries. Because in the end, when power becomes absolute and ego merges with ideology, leaders cease to be human. They become eternal warnings for the future. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video and are fascinated by deep and revealing stories like this, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming content and to discover more hidden narratives of history. See you in the next video.